Was Lucifer's fall before Adam's creation? Was it when Adam and Eve were in Eden? Is Lucifer part of the original 200 fallen angels mentioned in Enoch?
Yeah, a lot of questions in there as well. So,
Yeah,
um,
there's a compound one there.
so Lucifer, I would call him Hal-El. I would not use the term Lucifer,
Hello.
even though it's in the KJV Bible. There's also an annotation on the original KJV uh, Bible that the translator said if people object to that translation, we would understand and that they could use their own translation there. Lucifer is the god of the Gnostics and Freemasons. He's the great architect of the universe. And the word is Hal-El, Hal-El Bashakar, Hal-El, son of the morning. So Hal-El, that's one of his names. And he has multiple aspects to him. And yes, I think he rebelled before Eden.
So do I.
And the reason why I say that is that the Nahash, the serpent, which, as you take that back to the Nahash, the source word in Hebrew means like a priest, a necromancer, a sorcerer. This is a being that's walking, talking, intelligent that is also part of the polytheist hegemony and part of the priesthood. This is a reptilian being that is likely bigger than humankind. He's a beast of the field. The beasts were created before Adam is, or before humans are in day 6, maybe up to 1,000 years before, as you have a day is 1,000 years in 2 Peter 3. And that's if people aren't familiar with 2 Peter 3, you need to read that. That is part of the Rosetta Stone of helping to understand prehistory, believe me. But we're not answering that topic. And so obviously the Nahash have already rebelled, but sin hasn't entered the world yet because the law's not there, because Adam hasn't rebelled. But humans would have rebelled. And so, again, if people aren't familiar with my work, I think Eden is a separate creation sometime after day 8. We don't know how long, because all the details are different than what is told in Genesis 1. And I don't believe it's just additional information, because the MO of the Bible, when it adds additional information, it's never in contradiction. It adds more information, which isn't inconsistent to what we already received. So I think there's a separation there, and there's 2 creations, and the fallen angels have already converted all of the Nahash beings, whatever else is created amongst those beings, and it's a beast of the field, as it's talked about in Genesis 3. So we know it's a different being, and it had all of these things before the whole species was punished for their participation in the fall in Eden. And so I think that the pantheon was well in place and the whole world was led astray, but because there was no law, there was no sin that was accounted for until Adam and Eve broke the only law: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then sin came into the world. So that means that fallen angels had already rebelled before, but again, no law for the physical world. And so if I look at the information that we're being provided, then that Satan sometime, as Ezekiel 28 talks about, as it also talks about him in Eden, was giving his participation in the fall of Adam and Eve. It talks about his widespread trade of this period of time. We have no idea how long. And he's the one in Edom, but only in his cherubim form, not his seraphic form. He's called it the anointed cherubim there. So Gadrael in the book of Enoch might be his name, because that's the angel in Eden.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, it means wall of God in Hebrew, or God's wall, as you take that back into the Hebrew words. And so when we look at that rebellion, it just seems to have happened before that, well before that, might even be before, if there is a gap and there is a renewal of the earth, as Psalms 104 talks about, that rebellion would have happened between Genesis 1:1 and 2. And I think it's a better fit. I'm not dogmatic. I think it's a better fit because it answers 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3 is talking about this world in the beginning that was in the water and out of the water that perished. Everybody says, for the most part, in the standard dogma, that's the flood. Well, only the life on the earth, on the land, died, not the life in
Mm.
the sea, and not the whole planet. So the world didn't perish, it didn't die. But if there was this angelic war with angelic technology, they could have destroyed the earth down to its foundations. And then the earth was renewed beginning in Genesis 1:2. When the Holy Spirit is sent, the earth is renewed, as Psalms 104 talks about, in conjunction with the creation of the angels, which is done before creation. So, and in Exodus 20:18, heaven can be understood as not being the outer heavens, because heaven has three definitions. Shemaim, as it's in the Hebrew, it's the place where God lives, it's outside the firmament, and it's what's inside the firmament, and the firmament is called heaven in Genesis 1. So when they recreate the earth to create the firmament, to create life underneath, what's called heaven. So he created that heaven that fits perfectly with Genesis or Exodus 20:18, and that if you had destroyed the world, the waters above would have collapsed onto the waters below, created the chaos, and then you would have to separate those waters, which is the earth that was in the water, that's out of the water, that perished, is being talked about in 2 Peter 3. So I would put it sooner than Eden for all of those reasons and more, but I'll move on. And Satan is talked about in the book of Enoch as being the chief Satan and atop of the watchers. And so he's the one who fell first. As he fell in Isaiah 14, the Hebrew word Nephal, Nphal, it's a source word for Nephil or Nephilim. And it means fall. Put the I am plural on, fallen one. And so the fallen angels are the fallen ones. That's where you get that from. They're the Nephilim, the fallen ones of the Shemaim, the heavenly ones. And by extension, they produce their offspring, the Nephilim, and they're going to have some of those traits. And they're also called watchers.
You know, I have to also agree that war in heaven likely took place between that time. That was even a contention that Chuck Missler used to make between those days there. Because when we have Jesus returning in Revelation, his robe is already soaked in the blood of his enemies.
Yep.
And I believe it's the major prophets, I can't remember if it's Isaiah or Jeremiah, that describe part of that battle taking place with Satan and his angels and then the King of Kings.
Yeah. And Jeremiah 4 talks about this destruction of the earth. Yeah, and I used to think that was just a prophecy for that time, but as I look at that fits an MO of what I call a dual prophecy, where you get interesting information from prehistory. That's important to have, and in this case, the destruction. You get details for the time of the prophet, in this case, Jeremiah and the Nebuchadnezzar period, and there are unfulfilled details for the end time.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is in play in Jeremiah 4. And you can translate was as became. The earth was formless and void. And I won't go into a complete definition of void and formless to say how the world became ruined, but it says the same thing. That's the Hebrew word for was is Haya, the root word for Yahweh, the source word for Yahweh. And it can be translated as became or was.
Do a little word study there, folks. It'll take you on a ride.
It will.